Hello and welcome to Access Chat. I'm delighted that we're joined today by Scott Martin, who is a podcaster, close to our heart, writer, and also football coach. And that's football in the European sense, not the
Yes.
throwy, wearing body armor
No.
kind of football that
No.
American sense. So soccer for those
Yes.
on the other side of the Atlantic. So welcome, Scott. It's really good to have you with us. Deborah's in the air on a plane somewhere, so can't join us today, but
Flying away.
sends her love. So tell us how you came to start working in soccer, football, because you're in Wisconsin, and I'm guessing that that's not a sport that you grew up with necessarily, because soccer's really taken off in the US over the last couple of decades, and I'm guessing that you're not 21 anymore.
No. Slightly older than that.
Yeah.
Well, I really came about during the old North American Soccer League days when Beckenbauer and Pelé and Cruyff and everyone was getting older, not too old, but they would come here and play. And but that was so mismanaged and messed up. I actually, as a player, was caught in between the death of the NASL and waiting for Major League Soccer to start, because back during the days of the NASL, it was ethnic clubs and such. My coach was German, so we had a very strong German heritage. There were the Croatians in Milwaukee. There were the Brits in Madison, Wisconsin. You have the English typically down in St. Louis, the Poles in Chicago, and they would put their own clubs together. And a lot of times it was managed money wise because they had their own pubs on site. Those were the good old days, boys. Those were the good old days. So after a match, you'd end up going to the pub, and each club would have, of course, their history through awards and trophies sitting there to intimidate you. We didn't give a rip. So, those days are all gone, and it's so structured. It's become, I think, far too structured with how things are done.
So obviously those are the MLS now is big money.
Yes.
Now Cruyff and co, they were big stars, right? So
Huge.
Total football, massive international stars. But back in that time, the money, even though they were national figures, the money wasn't so big. So now it's really big business. But my guess is that you're also engaged very much in the grassroots side of things, and that's grown a lot.
Yes, I've seen it, but I will have to say, and I'm always going to be open and honest, especially when it touches my heart, like with soccer and football, that the pendulum, I believe, has swung in the wrong direction. And I have found too many kids do not play unless the coach blows a whistle and rolls out a ball. I hate that. I actually have been able to do something here in central Wisconsin that wasn't being done. I actually have my team is half our players are from one large high school and half are from another large high school in our area. So we combined together and we went out and won state championship last year over teams out of Milwaukee and Madison and some of the large areas because they didn't know about us. But I put together a bunch of soccer rats. Soccer rats, of course, are kids that go out and play without a coach and just play. And that's where they pick it up. That's, how the better players have picked it up by just playing. So I'm doing things old fashioned.
No, quite recently, I think there was some, don't remember the name, a German coach complaining for the fact that because there are so many, let's say, soccer, football farms for kids.
Yes.
Those players, who sometimes play by themselves or just learn how to play it in the street. Mm-hmm. They don't get into those places anymore. So it's almost like that soccer is losing creativity because all the players are born in a kind of a farm.
Exactly. And they have to do things structured. So from too many discs, the coaches use too many discs and say, run from here to there. And so I'll mention something about where I really started seeing a disjoint. I used to do evaluations for the Olympic development program with U.S. Soccer. And they asked me to come in and look at kids and make suggestions on who should be brought in to the group and maybe work their way up the ladder. I tended to focus on kids that had color, because to me, the white kids were coming in, you could tell that they went to so many of these high price clinics and they were too structured. I think that, yeah, we all know that the game it's a beautiful game, and it's about creativity and working together and blending. Well, I never was asked to come back again to do any evaluations. And what they ended up having on the roster was a bunch of white kids that were so structured. And this was 40 years ago. So look where U.S. soccer is now, not a whole lot further. So they didn't listen to what I said at the time. I wish they would have. So
I think that, respecting creativity and play, and not structuring people and allowing people to learn through play and acquire skills through play is extremely valuable, and in so many different spheres. You just look at the world's most successful education system. It's not the most structured, because that's the Chinese one, and they're pretty successful. But the world's most successful is the Finnish one. They get the best results. They start later. They spend less time in lessons. They basically allow kids to run wild and climb trees and fall out of things and get scabby knees and learn through play. And so I think that when we restrict that, we're losing out something. And I think that even as adults, adulting is bad. Sometimes we have to be responsible. We have to keep roofs over our heads, hold down the job, and all the rest of it. But losing our sense of fun and play, and our sense of discovery, means that we're all poorer, and that society's poorer as a result. How does that connect to our themes as a podcast? Well, Access Chat has always been about creativity and diversity, particularly focused on disability, diversity, and talent, and how including people with disabilities generates innovation and uncovers talent that's unconventional. And I know that you've done work in the disability space around disability sport as well. So maybe you can tell us a bit about that particular aspect of what you do.
Well, I haven't, I guess I have, but in my own way. So we're looking at 30 years now since I contracted group-based strep with necrotizing fasciitis. The media always like calling it the flesh-eating disease.
Yes.
I woke up from a 1-month coma to learn we had to remove your hands and parts of your feet to keep you alive. And the first thing that ran through my mind was, I guess I'm not playing any longer. And I was coaching at the university level. But I've just continued to try to be myself and not change, even though, and this is what always ticked me off, and I think it led me to doing my podcast, is that I ran up against discrimination many times on how, especially from males, because I think because of my disability, I think I scare males too much that they have to look at their own mortality. And I actually use that to my advantage before matches and stuff. But I don't go out. I was asked by not U.S. Soccer, National Soccer Coaches Association of America to work with them on doing presentations and education, but it never really went anywhere. But I just am myself. I talk to players when they first meet me, they think, oh, this, who's this? He has no hands. And we end up working together and winning just to get past that stigma of things that we can't do because of a disability.
Yes. So, and that's hugely important. We need that role model behavior, and
yes.
The generations coming up behind need that role model behavior. So, the company that Antonio and I work for does a lot of work with the Olympic movement and the Paralympics.
Oh.
So we're the IT partner for the Olympics and Paralympics. So I spent a lot of time around people with some really advanced prosthetics,
Mm-hmm.
So how, I mean, having had your condition and woken up, how have you seen prosthetics over the years improve? Because they're very different now to what they were 30, 40 years back.
Oh, I've got a story for you guys. Back in 2013, here in the United States, so many of our soldiers were coming back missing limbs. And Congress threw millions of dollars towards trying to solve the problem because it made them look bad. And one of the groups, which was Johns Hopkins University, very well-known research hospital and group, contacted me and asked me to fly out to Baltimore and meet with them. And they hooked me up on what they were trying to design were prosthetic hands with individually moving fingers. Well, we see them now. So I was able to make these things work. It was just on computer at the time before they took it out into the real world and try to make these things work. Well, when I sat down with them, I told them that, guys, my hands break down every 6 months and they cost a bunch and they're more simplistic to have repaired. What do you think is going to happen when you have so many more moving parts, which is going to increase repair costs and also frequency of repairs? And how are these disabled veterans going to have the insurance, truthfully, to repair them? What's going to happen? You better make them durable. Left Baltimore, never heard from them again. I did use one of those hands, a prosthetist let me use. Within 2 weeks, it fried. The electronics fried. So it's another thing that just upsets the heck out of me with, politicians trying to make something out of it to make them look good, but it's not realistic. So what I've had for 30 years, and again, they break down every 6 months. I actually have one that's not working properly now that I'm waiting to get a loaner so I can send it back yet again to make things more functional. So it's difficult, but things need to be done more. And again, that's why I do my podcast and what I'm now, I just rewrote my book to try to make that more promotional for the disability community.
Yeah. So I absolutely hear you on the complexity of some of the, prosthetics and assistive tech. It's really hugely expensive, and whilst everybody wants to create features and give someone the next Luke Skywalker arm,
yes,
and it's alluring, the cost of maintenance is still really significant. So yes, it's great if you're sponsored by, one of these companies, or you happen to be in the global north and happen to be wealthy and closely located to the factory or whatever. But that's not the reality for most people. So there does need to be that sort of appropriateness and durability and cultural context when we're creating products and services for people with disabilities, because quite often we over-egg the technology and don't think about the long term and the durability and the repairability and the impact on people's life. I know Antonio's got a question.
When I was a kid, my mother worked in an orthopedic hospital that I had to be in because I have to use orthopedic boots. And at the time, most of the people working and making those boots and making some prosthetics, they're all people with disabilities. So I had about 6, 7-year-old. I went there, and for me that was normal. No, I was not able to establish any difference between between individuals. You were telling us that you were telling them about your needs in relation to the prosthetics, and then you never heard from them anymore.
Yes.
I don't think today there is an excuse not to involve people who have needs for prosthetics in the designing processes. The information is everywhere, and there are good cases where the engagement happened. But why do you feel that they didn't call you back again? What is missing there? What we need to do to make sure that next time they do call you back?
I think I would have slowed down the process, and the process had to go quickly so they could get money from the federal government. Because if you weren't, I'm assuming that there were benchmarks that you had to meet in order to receive this funding. And you better meet those benchmarks. And if there's a guy like me coming in and warning them about potential problems, that's going to change them. They're not going to reach the benchmark. There's a gentleman in Paris that reached out to me, God, over a dozen years ago now, that he was developing prosthetics that were very simplistic, and he was making these things with what's the copy machines that spits out? You can make things with them. 3D.
3D printers.
Yeah, he was using a 3D printer and trying to make these things work. And he was going to different seminars and conventions and things promoting what he was doing. And we had a discussion about, man, you got to be careful that somebody doesn't knock you out and do something so you aren't viewed as being respectable or whatever. Because so for the major prosthetic companies that are building all this equipment, if someone's going to come out and knock them in half or more on pricing, what's going to happen? I mean, we've seen that throughout history with so many different inventions and things. When somebody had builds a better mousetrap, especially if it's half the price, well, they're going to get the market share. And if someone else doesn't want that because they're going to lose their business, then there's a problem. So what you're saying, you're asking me, Antonio, money. It's all about money, and it's not about people, and it's so unfortunate. It's ridiculous.
So I think that there are definitely market forces at play within and significant. I wouldn't necessarily call them monopolies because they're not necessarily monopolies within. And I'm loath to use the word cartel, not without saying allegedly a few times first.
Cover your ass.
Yeah. But definitely there are, groups of organizations that are providing these services. What was interesting was we've seen this also in other areas with the blind community. So braille displays, also massively expensive, hugely complex, loads of little moving parts, really difficult to maintain and repair, especially if your users accidentally spill yogurt in them, or crumbs and so on, and have maintained them over the years. They're really expensive and out of reach of most people that don't have government funding and so on. So there was a project initiated by the former chairman of the RNIB to create a different type of braille display, and they created a braille note taker with less cells, and it used a different technique, so it was less moving parts, and they were doing it for 1/10 of the price.
See.
And they distributed them in Africa with books preloaded on them. Now, there was no incentive for them. They were doing it because they weren't there to create a business. They were there to meet a need. But then it didn't become really a business. So they're not sold in the global north. So they're not the threat to the established hierarchy of organizations that are still selling these devices, but they ought to be, because there's no reason why people should be paying $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 for a device where you could have a similarly functional thing for 500?
Well, I had a guest on the show a couple of months ago, and we got into talking about their company. He works in a think tank, and they come up with ideas on what can help the disabled community. And they currently are producing very low numbers right now, wheelchairs that are less than 20% of the cost. He told me about what would happen to the price if it came to the United States or to the UK and such. It would just boom. It would just explode. You can't get around that. And we were really talking about you guys have to be able to get around it. But in places like Africa, where it needs to be down there, they're able to market it at that lower respectable price in countries like that. But why can't we still do the same thing over here? Because, man, there are so many people that rely on government funding. You know, us here in the United States, with the way our insurance group, oh my God, it's so ridiculous, because anyone that comes up with the idea or the push to try to get universal health care in this country just gets nailed in
branded a communist. Yes.
Man, it's just crazy. Well, Trump. Anyway, but it's just not happening. No, for example, here's another one. So I had a guest on the show from Canada. We were talking about Braille and money. They went in and changed their printing presses and things to be able to add Braille to let you know, so that people with vision issues are able to read what their money is. Well, in the United States, you don't know. We just don't think things through, and it's so stagnant and old-fashioned and not thinking progressively or proactively towards the disability community. It has to change.
Yes, the US approach to health, and I use care in quotes, is something that from the outside we can't really comprehend the insurance-backed system. But what we do see, where there is a lot of government subsidy of devices and services for disability, is that tends to inflate prices.
Yes.
And it creates a market where if the individual's not paying, then so who cares what it costs? And this is how you've ended up with these, gold-plated devices that if you aren't able to get access to the system, then you're completely unable to afford it at all. So, and I saw this when 10, 15 years ago, I was working on products where we were wanting to integrate text-to-speech into mobile products to build something to support people with dyslexia.
Okay.
And the same components, literally the same components, were a tenth of the price if we were going to integrate it into a game than if we were to use it for assistive technology. So they would license it to us for 10 times as much because we said we wanted to use it as assistive tech.
Humans can be so stupid and selfish.
Right. So there you go. Go on, Antonio.
I was recently reading a blog from an American that moved to Portugal, and he was comparing the cost of access to some healthcare services that he needed, was comparing with the United States and what was he paying in Portugal. And he started to realize that in Portugal, he was paying about 120 euros for a procedure that he was paying $5,000 in the United States.
Yeah.
So and then you start to realize, how is it possible that this procedure can cost $5,000? It doesn't cost. It's everything that is on the top of it, of the chain that is costing that money.
Yeah. My wife right now, as we're talking, guys, is working in the emergency room at our local hospital. And since they were bought out a few years ago from a corporation, they're doing things, for example, there are beds in the emergency room, and those are for people that have emergencies, right? That are seen by doctors and they have to wait in order to go to surgery or to go up to a room and stuff. No, they're not doing that anymore. Those rooms tend to be filled with people that, because they're cutting back, there's so many nurses that are saying, screw you, and leaving because of poor wages. And they're cutting back on the floors, on the beds that are available on the floors, that they're now placing patients in her emergency room instead of going up because it's cheaper. And they don't have as many doctors. They're pushing out the doctors because the PAs are less expensive. So it all comes down to the bean counters talking about how we can. Oh my God, I'm gonna pound my head against the wall when we're done here, guys, or else I'm gonna go to a pub at about 11 o'clock in the morning. So I don't know which way I'm gonna go.
So Scott,
Yeah.
we were early also talking about your podcast and your work. What actually motivates you to bring guests to your blog and to have open conversations about it?
I was a little kid in 1968, and I remember when Martin Luther King Jr. and Bobby Kennedy were assassinated, and everything was going on in Vietnam, and so many things were going on in this country, and all the protesting. And I watched Walter Cronkite on CBS News every night, and how honest he was. And it hit me, and it's always stuck with me, about when there's a problem, we need to talk about it, and action needs to be done. And there's nothing wrong with that. So the more I've gotten into the show, doing the show, the more I've been in search of and finding people that are more expressive and have a bit of a chip on their shoulder and wanted to do something about it, or at least express their views. So, we just go from there.
I think that's interesting, because I maybe disagree on some of these. Go for it, man. Some of these things, but politely, right? So I think it's absolutely essential to bring people to the conversation that are not afraid to voice their opinion. I think that sometimes that we as a community can do ourselves no favors by clearly having that chip on our shoulder, and it's a delicate balance between advocacy and rebel raising, right? Yes. And I think that I can't tell you which side of the line to walk on that one, because I think that sometimes we need the rebel raisers. We need the people that are going to occupy the buildings and do the capital.
Oh, no, not.
And all of that, but also we need the negotiators and the calm heads that move these things forward. But what I do agree with you on is we need people that are actually going to be truthful about the problems and not just brush them under the carpet.
Exactly. I guess that really, you just made the fantastic. That's the bottom line, Neil. Is let's just people that are open, honest, and not afraid of maybe knocking on the door, not just kicking it in. So I hear you, and I respect what you have to say about that aspect of it as well. There are ways when one thing works better than the other, and they can work in unison together as well.
Yeah. So I think because we live in such a polarized world.
Oh gosh.
People have both compassion fatigue from being shown horrible things all of the time, and also fatigue with the conflict and the confrontation that we're constantly seeing. So how do you think we can take forward the conversation? How who's the next Walter Cronkite that's going to shine a light on these things and bring forward the conversations, or are there multiple?
I think it starts with the youth. I used to teach high school social studies and history before I went on to coaching college soccer, football. And now I I've tried to get back into my own classroom, but I don't even get interviews, but that's a different issue. But I do substitute teach. So I do get into the classrooms, and the kids respond to me, for example, because I'm respectful of them and they're respectful of me. And I tell them that I have responsibility as an elder and things that I've had for life lessons to pass on to them, but they also have responsibilities as they're maturing about trying to gather thoughts and to promote positive actions. The kids nowadays have so many things tugging and pulling and pushing and doing all these things to them that they will react to just common sense. I think this generation that I'm talking about high school age, so 16 through 18. I think that they're looking for common sense. For example, on so many days when I'm working, it's just busy work. Well, I'll play music and 70s, 80s rock, Tom Petty and John Mellencamp, and so many of these things. The kids react to that positively. It's not just their new stuff. I think that they want to go back. They want to experience those days that we had, gentlemen, that we look backward and say, oh my God, those were so much more calm. They want that and they're not getting it. And I think that as they mature, they might start carrying us back to those days, to some calmness, to some thoughtfulness, and maybe actually get some things done that we always, and our government's always talked about doing, about common sense for humanity. And I think that they might be able to pull it off. Things that maybe our generations didn't do because so many people got into the great dollar or the pound. That I think I have hopes these kids might be able to do something about it.
Yeah, I think I'm still an optimist. When I was growing up, we grew up under Margaret Thatcher, and she had the famous saying, "There's no such thing as society," which has left us with a terrible legacy. Everybody's thinking selfishly of them, of their own benefit, and that collectivism, I think, that binds or did bind people together. I start seeing that in the values of the younger generations that are coming through. When we're trying to recruit within our organization, actually, it's not money that's actually attracting the younger people. Once you get beyond the hygiene factors of can it pay for me to afford to live,
yes,
that's not the main motivator. It's is this organization doing good stuff for the planet? Is there a social purpose? These are things that from our generation, which famous movie line, greed is good. That was I think that's set the tone for several decades. So I hope that, like you, that the younger generation, and I am hopeful that the younger generation are going to do things differently, and that some of us that have tried to carry the flame can pass on that flame to an empowered and educated and empathetic generation coming forward. It's been a real pleasure talking with you, Scott. We're at the end of our allotted time, but I really look forward to continuing this discussion later on social media.
Sounds fantastic, boys. Yeah, great. Thanks, Antonio. Thanks, Neil.